with that, Shabab, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carlos, and good evening to everyone. We have a whole lot of work ahead of us, and my goals for today's meeting are to create a structure that'll set us up for success and figure out ways we can do that in a way that ensures transparency to the public as well. So we have a few administrative items before we get started. First of all, we need to vote to approve the minutes from our last month's meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
There are misspellings, by the way. Names are misspelled.
Oh, thanks for pointing that out. Would you please either put that in the chat or email Carlos the correct spellings?
Sure. I mean, it's in the form of typographical errors. Sometimes the names are spelled correctly, sometimes they're not. I'll go through and correct them as best I can and send that to Carlos.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So with the acknowledgement that we'll make some typographical changes for people's names, we'll go ahead with the approvals. Anyone wish to vote against? And any abstentions? Perfect. And then I wanted to follow up on a motion we made at the last meeting. We sent a data request to the MCPD about data fields and dictionaries for its databases. I'm not sure if Chief Jones or his designee is present, but I'd love to hear if you have any updates on that. Do we have someone from the MCPD here?
I see Chief Jones connected.
Chief Jones, you may be muted. We can come back to that item later if Chief Jones is having some difficulty connecting.
Yeah, and I can also speak to that briefly.
Sure.
I sent an email with the request to Chief Jones. I asked if the data request was ready by this meeting, and it is not ready. Given other data and MPIA requests that MCPD has received, they're pretty inundated in those requests. So the PAC request will take a little bit of time, but maybe when Chief Jones can connect, he can give a little bit more on that. But that's the information I have.
This is Robin here. Having worked with bureaucracies for far too long, a little bit of time isn't good enough. We need to get some kind of estimate from MCPD about when they will actually deliver something. A little bit of time could be February, easily. And they are required to produce information that we request within 30 days under the legislation. So I'm happy to give them some, to let it slide and to give them some extra time. That's not a problem at all. But I wouldn't want to just be happy saying, "Oh yeah, take whatever you need." No.
Yeah, echoing what Robin said. And just off the top of your head, does anybody remember the date that we made the information request?
Last meeting.
So in theory they have about 2 weeks to turn it over to us.
Yeah,
they have 2 weeks left.
Could
Yeah,
we suggest the end of the month?
Yeah, right. Just to
say that would be a firm date until the end of the month, and from then on 30 days. Because I agree, it's a bad start if we make a request and then it's not responded to.
Yeah, definitely put a line in the sand somewhere and make sure that they know that we're going to be difficult about it if they don't produce.
Perfect. Carlos, are you able to pass that on to Chief Jones?
Yep, I will pass on the message to Chief Jones.
Great, and we'll make sure to send a reminder check-in at the 30-day mark and see what the update is. I know we have a very packed schedule most days, so something that Dalvin and I are proposing is that we have additional meetings. So those additional meetings will be for everything from trainings to opportunities to hear from policy experts on particular issues. We've already had a number of really great suggestions from a lot of people in response to the Google survey for people that the commission would benefit from hearing from. So we'll be inviting them. We hope to have the first such of these meetings next month. This month, however, we will be having an optional Microsoft Teams training, and we're very grateful for Justice for leading us on that and using some of that Microsoft expertise we have in-house. Also acknowledging that we have a lot of time in between meetings, I've shared around a proposal for intra-commission discussion, just to sort of talk that through a little bit. If we have an item that requires discussion on a substantive policy matter, and we want to include the entire commission and not just a subcommittee, one way to get around the Open Meetings Act is Dalvin and I make a sort of ask for feedback on a particular topic. All commissioners email their responses directly to Carlos, so we don't have any cross-email discussion happening amongst the commission itself. Carlos will then go ahead and post that information on the PAC website. So similar to these public meetings where it's being recorded and the recording will be made available later on, do be aware that any information you submit in response to that request for feedback will be made public. Once that is published, we'll also think of other ways to make that available. Later on in this meeting, we'll talk a little bit about using social media as one vehicle for doing that. And whatever responses everyone gives will then be shared out to the entire commission as well. Hopefully,
Shabab, sorry,
yes,
this is Caroline. Just a quick correction. I think this is a great suggestion. It's not to get around the open meetings laws. It's to be in compliance with it, but also to enable us to get our work done in an effective manner to serve the people of Montgomery County. So, we obviously support the open meetings law and we'll comply with it in every way.
Yeah, and to just add to that and to add to that, it's also about full transparency with the people we're trying to serve, right? And I think it's trying to be as transparent as possible as we do this work.
Certainly. Words make a huge difference. We're not trying to skirt our legal responsibilities. We're trying to figure out how to be transparent when working with the law from 1991 before Zoom was a thing. In addition to that, I've already gone over the additional meetings. And a couple of reminders, please reply using on the threads if we're sending replies to commission-wide emails. I've noticed in a couple of emails, we've had one or two commissioners dropped off, and there's always issues with people's correct emails. So if you just reply on the thread, it'll make sure everyone's included. When we're soliciting feedback on these Google surveys, another reminder to please complete it to the best of your ability. I know, for example, for the scheduling one, some folks indicated just one time per week that they were available, while others, really took some time to look through their entire schedule. So acknowledging that we're all, great folks doing lots of great work. The more information we have in that feedback, the better we can plan to meet everyone's needs. Go ahead. Did Alicia have something to say?
Yes. Hi. Thank you. Hi, Shabab. Is it possible that Carlos could pull together a group list, like a listserv of all of our email addresses so that when we respond or something goes out, it goes out to a listserv which contains all of our email addresses? Because I know that people have sometimes had to update and change or tweak their emails. So Carlos, would that be something, would that be possible?
So I have an updated list of all the PAC emails and phone numbers.
Yeah, but a listserv, is there possible to get like a group email address,
Yeah, that's something that I've thought of. I don't know if it's possible using, so the county uses Microsoft products. I don't know if there's a Microsoft product that I can create.
So as part of Teams, Carlos, I'm sorry to cut you off. As part of Teams, it actually does allow you to email everyone at the same time. So I can kind of show you that. But yes, so if we can actually, and again, team, I don't want to make this about the training, but if I can kind of like I'll take a look, and what you can actually do is you can choose external email address, and what that external email address will do, it'll give you one name, and that will go to everyone. So we can kind of then centrally update it. So I'm happy to work with you on that, Carlos, just to make it easier for everyone. So you don't have to then kind of make sure that you remember everyone's email address, because I recognize the challenge with that. So I can work with you, Carlos, on that, just because it is possible through the tool in one way. And then if we have to update, you can just update that tool and it'll go to everybody.
Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry, Shabab. Sorry.
Perfect. No, that's going to make our work a lot easier. Thank you, Justice. Finally, for the purposes of today's meeting, go ahead, and if you would like to speak, I know I can't see everyone's screen at the same time. There's the raise hand feature. So if you just indicate that, I'll try and keep an eye on the list of people, and we'll invite you to speak. And then if you can lower your hand, it sounds really bizarre because we're not physically doing that. That just lets me know that you're no longer looking to speak. As we start this meeting, I just want to bear in mind these items have already been shared on the threads, but since our last meeting, we've heard about the case of Breonna Taylor and the outcome of that case, and much closer to home, the case of Finan Berhe and what happened with that. So it's humbling and an important reminder that there's a reason we're doing this work. And I just want to acknowledge that as we kick off today's meeting. I'm really hoping that we can spend the bulk of this meeting and subsequent meetings hearing from each other. So in that spirit, I'd like to invite each of you to speak a little bit about what our priorities as a commission should be. I also want to specify that while there are a whole host of issues that are really important, right now, our goal is to try and identify some urgent priorities that will inform our subcommittees. So this is both to identify things that are perhaps time sensitive and things we can tackle first, acknowledging that we can tackle subsequent issues in year 2 and 3 of the commission. So thinking about the next year, is there a particular issue that you personally would like to work on? If we formed a subcommittee around it, a subcommittee that you would like to serve on. I know that the survey was a very helpful way to identify some key priorities. I believe that was shared out with all of you already. From the list that Carlos very helpfully summarized, the top priorities were in order: misconduct and discipline, school resource officers, hiring and recruitment, and mental health crisis response. So with that, I'd love to hear from all of you. Dalbin has kindly volunteered to kick us off. Dalbin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you guys know or are aware, last week, Montgomery County School Board presented data around school arrests over the last 3 years. Now, as you know, if you guys do or don't know, MCPS is very, very difficult in terms of sharing information out. But we were able to get this information, and out of 450 arrests over the last 3 years, 383 were Black and brown students. That is a whopping 83% of school-based arrests. And it is, quite frankly, absurd, right? And one of the things that we've seen a lot of in Montgomery County, in light of the Breonna Taylor, in light of the Breonna Taylor's murder, not just the non-indictment of the people who killed her. What you've seen is a lot of young people organizing around the presence of school resource officers in their schools. And there's been an abundance of public actions and through social media, through spoken word, through the arts, of students essentially asking MCPS to remove school resource officers from their schools. And so that's something that I feel incredibly passionate about, having met a lot of these students over the last year and some change. And I think that being able to create space for youth where they don't typically get an audience with adults that can really push some of these things that they want to push, I think that that's something that I would love to contribute on over the next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Dalbin. And if we could all just keep our comments to 2 minutes so we can hear from everyone, and then we can get into a further discussion. I'll just go through the list alphabetically. Alicia Hudson, if you would like to share.
Yes, thank you, Shabab. I'll share very briefly. My areas of top top interests for me are the infiltration of white supremacy in the police force. And I say this because it has been discussed and brought to news releases and press releases and investigations through CBS, PBS, and currently WTOP. Our House, the Congress, led by Norma Torres and 27 lawmakers, has called on the DOJ to release a highly redacted report from the FBI of which documents infiltration of supremacists in the police force. My concern is, of course, this is linked to hiring and recruitment. So that is my prime area of focus. But in addition to that, and I know I have 2 minutes, I also have expressed, and I've had feedback from friends of mine who live in the county regarding calls and how police are responding to these calls. And this is linked to defunding. You know, perhaps police don't need to respond to every call. What other response persons would be better suited to report to or respond to certain calls to cut down on this risk of senseless death, really? Thank you.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah.
Miss Carolyn Frederickson.
Hi, thanks, Bob. And I think I'm with Alicia in the real interest in recruitment and hiring. For me, I think it's not surprising, but it's still an unpleasant thing to read about how the Montgomery County Police Force is so unrepresentative of the community, and that it really needs a broader diversity. I'm also very concerned about the, I don't think there's a problem with people who have military background from serving on the police force, but there is a sort of presumption about their training that I saw in the materials we got today that is equivalent to other kinds of training that people would have. I think there's a real disconnect between how people are trained to be in combat and how they should be trained to be on our streets engaging in public safety. And so I think the recruitment and training, the recruitment and hiring are really, really important. Training, of course, is essential as well. But I sort of feel like if we're going to look at things sequentially, as well as take advantage of the work of the task force, which is engaging in a big audit in terms of diversity practices, but also the budget of the police force. I think for us to focus on the hiring and recruitment as a preliminary matter could be really extremely helpful.
Perfect, thank you.
And by the way, somebody needs to mute. There's some real background noise.
Ms. Cherie Branson.
Hi, yeah, so my areas of concern, I'm looking at the list for potential subcommittees, and so, you know, I have a few questions. First of all, are we going to do the 3 subcommittees? Are those going to be the major topics of those subcommittees? If so, how many people are going to serve on each subcommittee? Are we going to be able to serve on more than one subcommittee? So those are the preliminary questions I have. As far as my personal interests are concerned, I'm more interested in the traffic enforcement, mental health crisis, and other ways in which officers routinely interact with residents of this county and others on a day-to-day basis. If we are going to break up into subcommittees, you know, and then when it comes to the subcommittees, the question for me becomes, you know, what is the right number that we are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, and that those subcommittees can meet separately to do their work. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Branson. I'll take a quick moment to address that. Delvin and I spoke briefly about this, and our hope is we can have either 3 or at most 4 subcommittees. We'd like to have each commissioner serve on just one subcommittee. We'd also like to have all the subcommittee meetings be open to the public and have publicly published agendas and meetings, but keep the number of commissioners small enough that the private email threads that happen don't have the quorum for the entire body. So having said that, I don't think we're tied to any particular number of subcommittees or even the topics, and that's what we're hoping to get out of this discussion today. But some really valid things to think about as we plan and have this conversation. Next on the list, we have Mr. Eric Sterling.
Great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think that my desire would be to serve on the subcommittee that deals with promotion. When one thinks about what are the things that condition a police officer's behavior, it is the opportunity to be promoted. What are the signals that officers get? How are they rewarded? How do they get favorable shift assignments? Those kinds of things in terms of the evaluation of an officer for the purposes of promotion is critically important. And that's where the real guidance from management is reflected.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Next, we have Jasmine Williams. Ms. Williams.
Hi. So similar to Mr. Osario, I'm really passionate around the issue of school resource officers. I feel that by continuing to rely on an institution that's notorious for its punitive nature and its disproportionate effects on communities of color, we're basically ensuring the racial discrepancies and the perpetuation of the school to prison pipeline that the SRO program enhances in school disciplinary matters. So I just graduated from Clarksburg High School, and I've been in collaboration with several youth organizations and leaders, and I've organized protests, attended protests. I'm like in this community of young people in our county, and I feel I can safely say that there's like a general consensus around not wanting police officers in our schools, that the money that's funding this program could be better serving our students if it were reallocated to funding more counselors and nurses and social workers in our schools. So yes, SROs would be my top on my agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Next, we have Ms. Jen Lin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I feel pretty passionately about our mental health responses to mental health. That includes autism and Asperger's and folks with invisible disabilities that are in the community. Given the current state of disabilities right now, we are being forced to be more into the community. With less caretakers, we'll have one caregiver to 5 or 6 people right now. And that really heightens the probability that their behavior is going to be misinterpreted by law enforcement, and then they won't be able to respond in an appropriate way when addressed by law enforcement. That's a big problem. And I think also the 911 system, I think that in my head, there's got to be a simple fix similar to how the 211 system works for suicide prevention, or I'm sure some social worker or some mental health expert is answering those suicide calls and de-escalating over the phone. So I tend to think, with these 6 new positions for law enforcement, there's got to be a way to have a couple people taking those 911 calls or the 211 calls. And then in addition to when these calls come in, having a softer person, a social worker, someone to lead, to try and de-escalate. And then if the situation gets out of hand, which it can, I've seen it happen, there will be an officer there with them present. I don't think either one of them should be responding singly. I think they need to be paired. And I think that needs to be people available on every shift, 24/7, because this stuff happens in the middle of the night as well. So thank you all. I'll gladly serve wherever you want me.
Thank you, Jen. Jerome is not here with us tonight, so we'll skip over to Mr. Justice Reed.
Thank you. First of all, I think that I've been kind of reflecting on a lot of the conversation and the points that others have raised. I will also say that, Ms. Sterling, the point that you raised around incentives for police officers is something that really intrigues me, and it intrigues me from a standpoint of how do you drive the right behaviors? How do we focus on trying to actually start with assuming good intent, and then trying to kind of figure out where we can also then kind of measure accordingly. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned, first of all, I will serve on any committee that is necessary. I will absolutely be proud to help wherever needed. The one thing that we haven't really talked about, though, is the role that technology can play. We started this conversation on asking for data. I do think that there are different ways that data can be routed, data can be sourced, and it can be brought to the forefront to provide transparency. I think that ultimate transparency are ways that we can really dive a little bit deeper. So that is something that I think would be an undercurrent of a lot of the things that we're talking about, is the role that we can potentially de-escalate with information, right? Is there a way that we can look at, Mr. Osario, you mentioned the stats to start this conversation. They were pretty alarming to me. And I think if you put stats like that in front, I think that it does kind of drive some of the change in behavior.
Thank you so much, Justice. We have next in the alphabetical is Chief Marcus Jones. Chief Jones, are you able to join us?
So good evening to everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to hear and see everyone, and I'm hearing a lot of information being shared and questions being asked, and I think that's a great thing, because a lot of the things that I'm hearing you talk, I think there needs to be deeper conversations that we are willing to have with you all to help this committee better understand the processes, such as promotion and recruitment and hiring, as some examples, as well as I know there's grave concerns people have about the SRO program and with statistics. And I think there's a deeper dive that we've been working with MCPS to explain. There's some data that's in there that are listed as arrests that we know that are not arrests, but we understand that that these are the numbers that have to be reported through MCPS. So we're committed to helping you all as you all look towards making recommendations and to make our department better. We are willing and able to participate in this manner, and I think it's going to be good because it helps us to really to at least share with you all our processes that will help this committee move forward in the long run. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for sharing, Chief Jones. Earlier in the meeting, we were talking about the data information request that we sent over to your department. I know you said it would take a little bit of time. Do you think we'd be able to have a response to that request within the 30-day time period?
So we are going to work as hard as we can. I just ask for the committee's patience. I have a lot of our employees who are out teleworking, who are immunosuppressed that would normally and provide with MPIA requests. And we also have an extremely large backlog. Ever since the George Floyd incident happened back in May, we have had an enormous amount of requests that have come in from different resources asking for data, asking for MPI requests that has really put a large burden on my staff. And I've lost some staff members over the past few months that has had some impact. So we are going to do our very best to work with this, because it's not just a simple fix for us, but we will do our very best to try to get this in a timely manner.
Thank you, Chief Jones. I'd really appreciate your close attention to that. If there's any way to prioritize this above the other requests, I want to be mindful that, as my colleagues have shared, we do have the 30-day requirement listed in our authorizing documents. If we can get a response within the 30 days, that would be highly appreciated.
Absolutely.
I'll continue down the line. We have Ms. Nadia Sandy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think a lot of my colleagues have highlighted the issue of SROs in our schools. I think that's something that a lot of us have a lot of energy behind, so I'm going to leave that to the side. Not to say that it's unimportant, but I know that we have folks that are going to be carrying that work. What's been most of my mind, and the reason why I got on this particular commission is what happens with the disciplinary process. I am a person that comes from a union background, like I've always said, and I don't know any other profession that has a Bill of Rights. And it does worry me as a civilian, as a person who has gone through police brutality. This is something that it's not just important to me, but I see it as important to the entire community. Again, we live in this idea that Montgomery County is exception, but I'm constantly reminded from conversations with people in our community who have gotten arrested as late as this year, right? And undergone those situations. So my focus and what I really would like to work on is figuring out how we can work on a true, transparent, and honest disciplinary process. But that doesn't bypass the Leo board, but understands and highlights that not every profession has that particular right.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Next, we have Dr. Robin Gester.
Thank you, Shabab. I guess I'd like to say that it seems to me I was very glad to hear Justice talking about data and about the importance of data. I think data is going to underpin everything we do in every area, and it's really important that we get that pipeline moving and that we, have a pretty good process for sharing the data amongst ourselves as well. So data is one thing. I'm interested, especially in what I would call discretionary policing. That's policing to do with traffic stops and especially drug arrests. And I know that there have been changes to the drug laws. I don't know how those changes are reflected in actual police practice in Montgomery County, but I think that's a whole sort of, that area goes together to me. I have questions about why we have 100,000 traffic stops every year in a county of 1 million people, and who gets stopped and what happens to them afterwards. And I have profound questions about why we do that. I don't really believe that is much to do with actual traffic enforcement. I think that is entirely different kettle of fish. If you really just wanted to do traffic enforcement, you would have the police posted only at dangerous intersections. So those and I would also second what Nadia said. I did some research before on internal affairs and reporting from internal affairs. Internal affairs operates under severe limitations because of LIBOR. That's understood. But there are no limitations on the reporting of outcomes at the aggregate level, right? They can tell us what happened to the 60 people. And honestly, the reporting is very, very poor. It's not acceptable. So I think that's another area where we can make a real improvement pretty quickly. It's not hard for them to report better. They just need good feedback to do it. So that's me.
Certainly, thank you, Robin. Next, we have the FLP Lodge 35 president, Tori Cook, or someone that is representing Tori.
Yes, my name's Kate. Can you guys hear me? I have headphones plugged in. Okay, sorry. My name's Kate Brewer. I'm here. I'll most likely be at most of the meetings on behalf of Tori Cook. I'm the current secretary of the FOP union. I appreciate you guys letting me speak today. I'm also the training supervisor for in-service at the training academy. So hopefully I can answer some questions and help with some areas, especially regarding to training, because a lot of these things that are spoken about have a direct correlation to training and how we're going to properly train everybody. And I think it's important to know, for you guys to know what we're currently training and kind of the process that we go through when we're creating it. And then obviously would love your feedback so that we can make sure we're going forward properly. One thing that my interest is, and again, I understand I'm a de facto member, but is community policing, which is really, really important to a lot of us, but in aspects of training, but also in aspects of a firm definition of what it means in Montgomery County, what the residents want, what you guys believe that community policing is, so we can make sure we're getting that and communicating that properly to the police officers. And there needs to be some kind of shift from, and it's actually what a lot of you guys are speaking of, from specifically stat-driven benefits, if you will, right? That's not really a community policing approach. So we need to look at that and see how, not saying that you don't get the information, I'm saying as stat-driven as police officers are encouraged to be sometimes, maybe we need to look at that as addressing it. And also, again, what many of you have said is having more resources for us to draw from. Many people call 911, as you guys know, because there's no other resources that we currently have. So being able to call somebody else with mental health workers, and again, working in conjunction with them, but also drug counselors and resources that we can go to. Once we respond to the scene, sometimes we're very limited as to what we can do. And giving somebody a phone number to call might not be enough. We need something in that stopgap to have that immediate resource that they can reach out to, so that we can kind of bridge the gap more than I think we're doing right now. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Kate. Really appreciate you being here on behalf of the FOP and sharing with us. Next, we have Mr. Vernon Ricks. Mr. Ricks, I think you might be muted. Mr. Ricks, I believe you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
I have interest in multiple issues of modern day policing, and I'm interested in also what the feedback will be from the Reimagining group and how the county is going to implement and work with that information. And so my particular interest is all of the above subjects that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. And I'll just speak for myself briefly. I think there's a lot of really urgent issues here. One thing I'm particularly interested in is, as we move towards alternatives to police, similar to what Kate was saying, there's so many issues that our officers are currently not equipped to handle. As we think about additional supports available to our community, to make sure that the mental health supports that we offer are not in some ways reproducing carceral systems, by which I mean things that are mandatory, giving people care without their consent. There's so many horror stories of patients being locked up in mental health institutions, being handcuffed to their beds. And we need to make sure that any kind of care model that we put forward is driven by compassion. So that's something that I'm hoping that we can continue to see in all the additional services that we think about and brainstorm on. It's been really great to hear from everyone. As I mentioned, Delvin and I were hoping to have 3 or at most 4 subcommittees. And we've all heard some common themes. It looks like SROs is a common concern for people, hiring, promotion, disciplinary measures, data. So there's a lot of different themes here, and I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2. I'd love to hear from all of you about what you think from this conversation, how we can best structure our work for the next year. And I'll be keeping an eye in case anyone's got their hand raised and I'm not seeing that. Robin, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So it seems to me that there's a lot of interest in SROs, and there are plenty of people who seem to want to work on that. I think the thing that Jen Lynn talked about mental health is really important and has to be addressed. I love my issues, but that's probably more important than my issues. So that's a sort of urgent issue, if you like. I do think I mean, I don't want to be just sort of lobbying for the things that I'm interested in, but it does seem to me that the very broad question of discretionary policing covers a lot of different territory and is a useful bucket. So it doesn't just mean traffic stops, and it doesn't just mean arrests, and I mean, it can cover a fairly broad area. So I think that might be a useful bucket to consider.
And Robin, for folks who might be less familiar, how would you define discretionary policing?
I would say it's policing where the police officer has considerable discretion in whether they're going to stop somebody, and if they do stop somebody, how they deal with them. I mean, police officers always have discretion in how they'll deal with people, but it seems, like I got stopped by a police officer for driving through a stop sign. This was a couple of years ago. It wasn't just one stop sign. I drove through 4 stop signs on my way trying to get my son to school over at Northwood. It wasn't like I was crashing through them at 40 miles an hour, but I know that I went through all 4 of them, right? And I'm pretty sure that the fact that I didn't get a ticket had something to do with what I looked like and how I appeared, and I had a kid in the car. Well, fine. I mean, I'm not saying I should have gotten a ticket or not gotten a ticket, but it's discretionary. And whether you decide to roust somebody possibly for drugs is discretionary. You can see people on a street corner and you can decide, well, am I going to approach them? Am I not going to approach them? How am I going to approach them? So that's different to me than responding to a call for a police officer to investigate an assault or investigate a burglary or, a crime or other things that police officers do. Here they have an opportunity to decide how am I going to address this? And we don't really know much about incentives inside the police force. I think that's another important place. I mean, I know nothing about incentives, right? I mean, I have no idea if there's a list of officers by, inside, as Will Jawando mentioned at one point, a list of officers posted by number of arrests. I don't know. I mean, if that was true, that would be really worrying. But I don't know if it's true. So I'm rambling a bit. Have I answered your question?
Yes. Thank you so much, Robin. I'll just go through in the order in which I've seen people raise their hands. Nadia.
Yes, so I think Robin said something that's really important, and it's kind of figuring out what's priority, right? The way that I can't even talk right now, I'm so tired. The way that I break it down in terms of the work of the police is how they're trained, what they do, and this is where the discretion comes in, the consequences of the reporting, right? That's the way that I kind of see the process of everything that goes through. And obviously, what I think about is how do we enter in this process to begin with? And is the fact that we don't have alternatives. And so when it comes to being able to create an emergency response system in the county that's secure, safe, and the response to the particular emergency you're calling for. I mean, the police are not trained for a mental health breakdown, and if they are, that was probably a couple of months, right? And it's not really their fault. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that that's not their role in our community. And so what I see it as more is kind of figuring out what this alternative can be and focus on the alternatives in order to prevent people from going into this system that's already, I mean, once you're there, right? And then another part of that, because I think, I don't know who I was talking to about, but the way I learned organizing is with I don't know if you guys have heard the drowning babies down the river metaphor. And you see babies coming down the river, and you're with your friend. So you jump in and you're trying to get all these babies out, and they keep on coming, and you're looking at your friend like, what are you doing? Why are you? Well, I'm going to go find out who's throwing down babies. So there has to be kind of two things that are responding to what's currently happening. So those disciplinary consequences, what we're going to do to set a precedent for the future, and then being able to stop people from coming into this process. So what alternatives can we have to emergency response in our community? I think those are going to be the things that if we focus on this year, we can get a big, do a lot.
Thank you, Nadia. Dalton.
Yeah. Hi. So as we were all talking, I was taking notes to try to figure out how we can group some of these, right? Because I think one of the most important things that we all know is that all of this work builds on each other, right? So for example, and I'm just using this one as an example, but the school resource officer budget is a certain amount of $1 million, right? So in an ideal world, thank you, Robin. In an ideal world, if we can wave a magic wand and take that from that and put it towards more mental health resources, that would solve two buckets, right? In theory, right? And so one of the things that, as Justice was talking, as everybody else was talking, was I was trying to group this was for him, he mentioned technology, right? So how would we use technology to both measure diverse recruitment, training, and officer hiring, but also to measure officer effectiveness and misconduct, right? Because I think if we were to utilize technology to maybe change the way that officers are incentivized, right? Because I think Robin made a really good point. The way that it's currently happening right now is not working, right? And we don't know how it goes, and Chief Jones can speak to that further as we go. But if it's not currently working, how do we use technology to change the way we're incentivizing officers and potential misconduct, right? And not saying that that's what Chief Jones and his team are doing, but it's possible that's what's happening, and that's what's creating this culture of misconduct amongst police, right? And so I think our biggest thing should be, and I'll share this with everybody after, but it's grouping some of these, right? So Jen mentioned mental health and the mental health crisis response, right? Realistically, we do not have resources in the county to respond to that because we're spending money on the way on policing. So how do we move that along? And so I think grouping them in as organic a way as possible, so that way we hit all these big marks, I think is probably gonna be the best way for us to do it. And I took some notes on that I can share with the group.
Perfect. Thank you, Dalvin. We have Mr. Eric Sterling next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just a couple of points. One is that I want to try to think about how we as a commission look at the question of public safety. How do people in the county feel that they're safe from burglary, from theft, that their bicycles are safe, that they feel safe when they're walking at night home from Metro or from the bus, that they feel safe from hate crime, from sexual assault. I suspect that different communities in the county have very different perceptions about whether or not they're safe. And that so that's one piece that I'm not sure how we measure yet, but the sense of, are the police doing the public safety job, needs part of what we pay attention to. Historically, communities of color have been under-policed. And that aside from the disproportionate kinds of arrests and the harassing kind of policing, that's been another kind of problem. When Robin speaks about discretionary policing, the most recent arrest data for Maryland is from 2018. In Montgomery County, 60% of all of the arrests for drug possession are for 60% of all the arrests for drug sales are for marijuana. And 80% of all the possession arrests are for marijuana. Montgomery County police make 29% of Maryland's marijuana arrests statewide, 29%. Now that's discretionary policing at a time when the General Assembly decriminalized possession of less than 10 grams of marijuana. So, the simple question is, what's going on? That represents an enormous, we're talking about over 5,000 marijuana possession arrests in 2018, out of a state number of slightly more than 17,000 marijuana arrests. Why is Montgomery County doing so much of that? That would be a kind of question, right. and therefore, does that distract from public safety?
Certainly. Thank you, Eric. Next, we have Ms. Alicia Hudson.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really encouraged by the comments that I'm hearing from everyone, and it seems like we're going to be effective working together. And I'm looking at a note by Dalvin. He's stringing together hiring, recruitment, training, and retention. Yeah, I think that could possibly be one committee altogether. But for me, having grown up in the county, being who I am, having walked around in the skin that I'm in for however many years, I can tell you implicit bias is alive and well. Racism is alive and well in Montgomery County, and I live in a pretty affluent area, but it's alive and well. And I have been stopped and questioned. And as Robin mentioned, discretionary policing, really there being no basis to stop me. Just to inquire about what I'm doing in a particular place at a particular time. Of course, they have kind of a embarrassed grin and like, okay, well, you have a great day. I guess upon hearing me speak and interact with them, maybe it wasn't what they were expecting. But I'm hate to break it to you folks. It's alive and well, and I thought it wasn't, because I went to pretty well integrated schools, and we were my middle school, Town Country Day School, which was closed 3 years ago, was predominantly white, but also a lot of students, Hispanic students, and persons of all different religious backgrounds. But I know I'm probably taking too much time, but that for me, and as we look at the Congresswoman leading other lawmakers to really press the FBI, we need this data. And currently the WTOP has an actual news program ongoing. I'm very concerned that I don't want a George Floyd to happen here. There aren't thousands of George Floyd incidents. But I honestly believe that there is a concern that there is an infiltration, and not just the current police force having come from supremacists, but that there are police seeking out affiliation with and joining these groups, and that's frightening to me. That's frightening. So I'm more, I guess I'm the person who's at the, if we consider us like a body, I'm at the mouth. Who are we picking? Who are we picking off the tree? And then it seems like we're going to have a nice continuum. And how are we training them? And then who are we going to promote? So I'm very hopeful.
Thank you, Alicia. Next we have Ms. Carolyn Frederickson.
Hi, thanks. And as again, I'm agree very much with Alicia that that's a critical, important area. I was sort of thinking that a kind of broad, if we wanted to have 3 broad buckets of committees, that one strikes me as just personnel. That's the hiring, recruitment, training, et cetera. One could be tasks, which, what are the functions, which includes this discretionary policing. And I was just thinking about this thing that you hear all the time about quotas that for police officers have for traffic stops. Is that true? I've never actually seen that verified, but that would be a very interesting data point, because that would send certainly a bad incentive. But that's sort of what, tasks, meaning both evaluating like what they do and maybe shouldn't do, like are there mental health functions that should be better handled by others. So that involves some analysis of the budget, but also what comes in. And this is where I'm thinking about the traffic stuff is, Ferguson was obviously highly complicated, and a lot of communities are complicated by the fact that courts get their budget paid in part because of fines and fees. I'd like to know, from the police department, what is the traffic stop function? Or could that be done by more cameras instead of police officers, which would be a different way? And I guess the last, I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody, I don't know, but the last function I was thinking about was, I think what Eric was speaking to, which could be about kind of public relations, public perception, community relations. So our kind of external focus, in some ways with the community, and how do we serve that function, and how do we also understand how the police are perceived and policing itself is perceived. So that's sort of just generally sort of what came to me from these conversations. That might be a way to organize. 3 committees isn't that many. We might want more, but they'd have fairly broad subject matters, so a lot to work with. But anyway.
For sure. And Carolyn, very quickly, the second category you mentioned was CAPS. Could you spell that?
Tasks or functions. Functions, like what are the broad categories? Mental, kind of, violence intervention, mental health, sort of an understanding, where there are things that are, and I think some of the reports we've seen break this down, and so that would be a good beginning. How much of the time or the budget is spent on certain tasks or functions, and again, to look at whether the budget could be, that there would be others could be the lead on some of those, even though you might need law enforcement at some point, even in cases where there's a mental health issue because somebody might become violent or dangerous or something like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Cherie Branson, I think you had your hand raised earlier. I'm not sure if you still wanted to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I am. I appreciate the comments, and I'm trying to sort of think about this in a very organizational kind of way. I'm looking at the chat, in the chat where, Dalvin has has put up a number of different committees, essentially subcommittees, and I think that's a helpful way to go. So I think what's important to remember is that none of the subcommittees are going to be siloed, right? Everybody is still going to be talking to each other at every monthly meeting, or however so often the general meetings may occur. I think what's important is to establish the big picture focus for each subcommittee, and allow that subcommittee, when it meets, to lay out what it believes its issue areas may be, and to have those issue areas reviewed by the body for the purpose of ensuring that there are no gaps and there are no overlaps, right? Each one of those things can undermine what we do. Once that has occurred and people have decided, which subcommittee they would like to be on, then the subcommittees can figure out what sort of information, requests, or additional assistance they may need from staff. That's kind of the way that's kind of the way it usually works, and it will probably be best to just stick with that model. So that's my suggestion.
Certainly. Thank you, Ms. Branson. I think that's exactly what Dalvin and I had in mind. So I'm glad to hear that there's agreement there. Our hope is that prior to our November meeting of the full commission, that each of the subcommittees can meet once and perhaps put together some specific requests they would like to make of the MCPD, so that at our November meeting, we can review them all together and send off a combined data request. In terms of an organizational matter, our hope is that each subcommittee will organize themselves if they want to have a subcommittee chair or co-chairs, or if they decide that that's not necessary, that's up to them. But as I said, our strong preference is that we don't have people serving on multiple subcommittees, just so that we can ensure that the email threads are below quorum and that everyone has a sense of what their priority is, acknowledging that people are welcome to sit in on other meetings, which will be public, and share feedback as required. Alicia, I see your hand up one more time. I think you're muted, Alicia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a question for Chief Jones, if he's still on the call. I wondered if social media posts were looked at all as you're vetting and interviewing officers. I know that well, I'll learn more about the hiring process and so forth, but that was just a question I had.
Yes. So all of our officers who go through the recruitment process, we vet all of their social media pages, and we do an extensive overview of social media, and that is something that is also monitored while individuals are on the department themselves as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Jones. I want to be mindful of time, so want to move on to the next item. I'm wondering if perhaps if Dalvin and I can connect and narrow down these categories a bit more. I think while we still have a few kinks to work out, my sense is that I'm hearing some broad agreement around key issues for us to focus on for the next year. So we'll do a little finessing of the categories and send that out. And we can check in individually with all of you based on what you've expressed interest in, and maybe do some sort of ranked list of priorities to make sure that everyone can get into their first or second priority for a subcommittee. I'll move on to the next item we have here, unless there are any further comments. Let me take another look.
With Nadia's, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Nadia shared a little bit about the LEOBR, and I know, and having attended the task force discussion that was not too long ago, there was some discussion of a community review board. So could that perhaps be part of that, whatever name we want to give that committee? Because I think that's super valuable. Yeah.
For sure. Thank you, Alicia. We'll make sure to include that in the scope of the committee's work. So one piece that, moving on to the next agenda item on public forums, one thing that we are required to do in our authorizing statute is host public forums. So we'd like to go ahead and get those started off this year. My hope is to have the first one in December. I'm tentatively proposing December 7th, which is a Monday. It would be 1 week prior to our December monthly meeting. And that would give us a little bit of time between now and December 7th to think through the pieces a little bit. I know Eric's made some really great points in previous meetings about making sure any community outreach we do happens through multiple languages and takes into account the real diversity of our county. And we'd also want to make sure that anyone we invite in truly does represent as many members of the county as we can. My hope is that it is both a chance for members of the public to share their stories, but if we can also invite a few key individuals to speak with us, that we can ask questions of them as well and get their feedback on some of the pieces that we're considering, any proposals we might be considering in the subcommittees. So given that it's about 2 months away from now, I'm sure we'll have plenty of topics ideas that we're throwing around, and we can solicit feedback on those ideas through those public forums. We've already heard from a lot of you about specific individuals, organizations, or communities or identities that we should have represented. If you have additional thoughts, please do send them our way. We've also asked people to give suggestions for questions to ask at these forums of the members of the public. So if you have additional suggestions, again, please do send them our way. But that's just one piece that we're working on and wanted to keep you all updated. We also want to think about how we can reach more members of our community through, sorry, let me just see if there's any questions about that. I see Mr. Ricks's hand is up. Mr. Ricks? Mr. Ricks? Can you hear us?
Yes, I see we're near the end of the agenda and I still haven't heard anything, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, about the training of the commission, the training. Academy or online, the shortened version, the long version, or anything. And I think that there is a lot will help this commission if they at least know some basics about what they'll be dealing with. I mean, when I
Certainly.
hear, you know, I mean, when we're talking about whether they set up speed or stop signs, as Robin was talking about, stops, whether or not cameras, you know, are doing what they should do, or all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of mechanics inside of where we are to where we need to go. So I'm just wondering when we are going to have the shortened version. Are the hearings that you're talking about, are they going to be virtual, or are they going to be, you know, live hearings? So how are you looking at that?
Certainly, Mr. Rex. I believe Carlos sent around the proposed dates in the email, so I can just read those out. We're hoping to have them over 5 successive Wednesdays with a break for the Thanksgiving holiday. So it'll be November 4th, 18th, and then December 2nd, 16th, and 30th. And we can make sure to put that in the follow-up email to this meeting as well, so that's all in your inboxes. And for the December forum, we certainly want to do it virtually over Zoom or some other platform that's available to the public to make sure that we're not getting into issues with, you know, until it's safe to meet up in person. Ms. Branson, I see your hand up as well, if you'd like to share.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. My question was about the forums. And also just a clarification on the training piece that Vernon mentioned. I thought that there was a option to do, if one could not do the training, the shortened training piece on the day set forth, that it would be recorded and you could see it then. So so I guess it would be helpful to have, you know, to have that information also. I know it's been distributed, but once, you know, when it becomes when the training pieces become available after the initial meeting, it would be helpful to have emails that explain to us that yes, this is available and now you can click it on if you weren't able to attend. That's first. Second, is the public forum in the age of Zoom and in the age of COVID. You know, and I don't, you know, mean to be Debbie Downer, but, you know, quite frankly, I guess it's a two-edged sword. It's good to hear from people about their individual issues and concerns, interactions with the police in Montgomery County. And to some extent, it is enlightening. However, for, you know, 2 hours to hear individual stories is not necessarily going to inform us as to what the philosophical and policy issues may be that we have to tackle. You know, there are a lot of good reasons to have a forum where people can tell their stories. You know, it is valuable in a lot of different ways. However, if that's all we have, without more, then we have potentially set expectations and that we cannot meet. So before this happens, you know, I would suggest that there's some thinking around the composition of testimony that we are seeking. Some thinking around the yes, if you will, who may be presenting that day. Some thinking around you know, what the commission's response may be. Forums, because if you have forums and people just talk, they're going to expect you to say something back. And so then what? Okay, so there's a lot that really needs to be fleshed out. I understand that the value and the importance of having residents be able to speak their piece. You know, somebody's been in public service for like 35 years. I get that. But to allow people to speak their piece and have nothing planned to address their concerns is to set yourself up to have tomatoes on it too. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Branson. That's certainly something that we should take into consideration and make sure we set up expectations appropriately. And continuing on the theme of engaging members of the public, since we are in the age of COVID, we've been thinking about alternate ways to engage members of our community. Dalvin has something he'd like to share about using social media to do just that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things that Shabab and I talked about was that, and particularly in this age of COVID, but also coming out of it, because I think also one of the things that I think we all realize is that we are trying to come together to solve issues that existed before COVID, and that we hope that they do not exist once we get out of this pandemic. And so one of the things, as we talk about engaging youth, engaging Spanish-speaking families, Eritrean families, things like that, one of the things that two of the things that we've talked about is using social media to put out graphics in different languages that highlight different things. For example, in the chat, Susan shared the bill that's being proposed to deal with the LEOBR. And that's something that, being entirely honest, as you guys probably know, when you go and speak to our communities, whether in Spanish, English, Creole, doesn't matter. They have no idea what that means, right? And so being able to maybe create a one-pager in different languages that we can blast out in social media to get into the hands of our communities is an example of something that we can do that I think would give us a way to use social media in a way that reaches the families and the communities that we're looking to serve. The other thing that Shabab and I had talked about was so Anchor gives you this platform where you can essentially record 5 to 10 minutes of like little segments where folks can come on and say, for example, like Robin and I came on one week and we talked about the bill. We talked about a bill that somebody was about to introduce in county council, right? And it's an audio form and we can post it on the website. And that's an informal way to be able to reach folks that can just listen to something for 5 minutes and get some takeaways from it, right? And then maybe the following week, Alicia and Caroline can come on and talk about something that we did in our subcommittee that week, right? And it just gives us a different way to reach folks that they don't have to sit in front of a computer and watch an hour-and-a-half meeting. They can listen to something for 5 minutes, and then that I think also sets us up for the forum that we are talking about having, because then it's not us just asking people to re-traumatize themselves with no idea of what we're going to do with that information. Because we've been so transparent through these different mediums, I think it then allows people to say, okay, well, I'm going to come and share this story because I know, for example, that Ms. Frederickson and Ms. Hudson have talked about training and retention, right? So I'm going to come and share this experience because I know that's what they're working on. And so that's something that we talked about that I think could be a really good way to just really be as transparent as possible, but also reach as many people as possible, both young and old, who are locked at home right now, who just honestly aren't, they're working from home, and it could be something that they use, that they listen to for 5 or 10 minutes every week to catch up with what we're doing.
Excellent. Thank you, Dalvin. I see Mr. Ricks has his hand up. Mr. Ricks, would you like to share?
No, I already said that.
Okay. My apologies. Ms. Alicia Hudson.
Hi, yes, Madam Chair, I wondered if you considered my thoughts about the Twitter accounts, so that people would have easy, unfettered access to what we were doing and what we were saying to each other. Did you all think, what did you and Dalvin think about that in terms of, and we can put that here before the commission right now, yeah.
Yeah, so we talked. Yeah, so we talked about that. We thought that was a great idea because I think, again, 140 characters. You're literally, it's that you just check it, once or twice a day, and you're able to kind of get our unfiltered thoughts on some of these things. Because I think one of the things that we are, and Chief Jones kind of alluded to this, where we may have 1,000,001 questions about even their process, right? So if we have 1,000,001 questions, and we're people that have constant professional interactions with police, imagine how many questions the community will have and they've had a ton of really bad experiences with law enforcement, right? So we thought that Twitter would give us a really good medium to be able to reach those community members too. Because again, say for example, we have a day with a commissioner where say Nadia's on Twitter that day just answering questions from community members. I think that's also another way that allows us to reach folks very differently. So yes, we thought that was a great idea, and we thought that would be a good way to also boost the stuff that we're sharing that are in shorter formats and the longer formats as well.
Awesome. Nadia, did you want to share?
I guess the idea is going to get a little bit more kind of filtered through. I understand of being able to kind of have each of us have some sort of ownership over certain segments, because I think everybody has their different perspectives. But I just really want to emphasize that if there's a space to be used during those times to be able to not just to answer questions, but to highlight an instance to dismantle the idea that Montgomery County is not undergoing the same injustices that folks in Ferguson are undergoing, not to compare it at all, but to say that this is, racism doesn't discriminate where it's going to be at. So just kind of keeping that in mind so that we're kind of attuned to what's happening.
Certainly. Thank you, Nadia. Robin, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, not to not to be the guy throwing cold water on it, but I'm somewhat concerned about Twitter. Twitter is an instant reaction medium, and as Jerry Branson pointed out, people who tweet at you on Twitter expect a response in microseconds, and I don't think the commission should be set up to do that. I don't think we are expert enough to be answering, for example, on behalf of the police department or the rest of the county government. It's we're here to kind of do some measured work to take our time and figure out what's really going on and to respond. I'm absolutely, totally behind the idea of connecting to the community in as many ways as possible. But I'm just a bit worried about Twitter because it's so instant response. And Sherry's point that people will be disappointed because of what they get back from us, I think is very reasonable. They'll be asking us questions and we won't be able to answer. So just, 10 cents. For
sure.
And maybe Alicia, you have a different perspective. I'm completely open to it. I'm just a bit worried about it.
Yeah, and I totally get it, given the person who tends to use Twitter in a very unuseful way on a daily, regular basis. But from my experience as a former teacher, and lawyers do it as well, but as a former teacher, teachers really, really use Twitter a great deal to exchange ideas, to work on improving their field pedagogy. But yes, again, that's one interprofessional group. At some point, I guess, Madam Chair and Dalvin, what has to be figured out is how we're going to go about doing it. Is it just a blah, throw it out there? No, I seriously doubt that. It has to be very organized and for a specific purpose that it's done and headed by or directed by someone, and it could be on any given day. But that was just an idea. I know that it's worked very effectively for groups of professionals that I've worked with. So.
I think you're right. And I think what I'm hearing is that if this is something that we move forward with, we have to be very intentional and careful about how we roll out the plan. So really valuable to have this feedback. I'm looking at the hands that are raised. Mr. Ricks, did you want to share?
Yes, I agree with Robin. I am not a tweeter or whatever all the different things are out there. I think sometimes that gets you in trouble. And I would hope that I hope I'm hearing right, that the commission is looking at not the fact that we have the worst police department in the country, but that we have a police department that we want to help to make improvements and to have a positive outcome on policing in Montgomery County. I mean, I don't want us to either have public hearings where we are expressing people's concerns, more or less, but that we are expressing how we have come together as a commission to help people to really understand and make it a positive department for Montgomery County. So I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say, is that I hope that we are looking at the department as something, as a department that we can work with and that we can help to bring about any change that we see that it needs to come about.
I think we're all on the same page.
Thank you, Mr. Ricks. Really appreciate that. Ms. Branson?
Yeah, at the risk of beating the horse, let me just be really, really clear. We can't do Twitter. And the reason we can't do it is because there's nobody on this commission who really should be speaking for the commission per se in a social media format. That's really dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. I don't want to have the Cherie Branson Day on Twitter, because I am absolutely not empowered to engage with members of the public with my personal opinion on what the committee may or commission may or may do, may or may not think. That is dangerous. That is dangerous in ways that folks, because that'll fly back and bite you. And I don't think you want that. I mean, it's everybody out there ain't a fan. Everybody out there ain't, all in favor of, yes, let's reform this. No. And so to create a public record where you're potentially allowing folks to gain ammunition to undermine the ultimate goal of this body is extraordinarily lacks prudence, I should say. So this commission essentially is new wine in old bottles. Okay, the subject matter where we are covering is new, but the format and the process is old. And it is a format and a process that has actually yielded a lot of good results. We don't have to remake the wheel. We don't have to do new stuff. What we have to do is be transparent in a different age. And how we do that absolutely has to be something that will not bite us later. So I'm totally against Twitter. This is not that we don't need to do that. We endanger ourselves, we endanger our work, and we ultimately endanger the people that we're here to help. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Ms. Branson. We'll certainly note your objection to us using Twitter. And really, I think the root of this is, to your point, trying to figure out how we can be transparent in a new age. Delbin, did you want to share? Delbin, I think you're muted.
Oh, I was saying no. I was going like this.
Alicia? Alicia Hudson? I think you're muted,
sorry.
Alicia.
Oh, okay. I thought Nadia's hand was up before mine, but
oh.
Did you hear Nadia or no?
I think Nadia's telling you to go ahead.
Yeah, to echo what Madam Chairman has stated, I think that the concern was to try to be as transparent and as open as we could with the public. It was not to have one of us go be spokesperson in any way, shape, or form for the commission. That is not what the Twitter idea was about. It was my thought, that how can we utilize technology to, again, as we stated, Madam Shabab, to be more transparent to the community and welcoming. And that was it. But again, these are just ideas.
For sure. Thank you, Alicia. Nadia, did you want to add something? And maybe that'll be the last comment on this topic since we're coming up on time.
That's fine, and I'm sorry about this. I just want to make sure that we're continuously challenging the current structures that we have, because those structures marginalize the people that are not in these conversations. And that's what I think the idea is. Twitter, yes, we're very careful with those lines, and I understand, as someone who's worked in Annapolis, as someone who's worked on legislation, we are public servants in a way, right? We're doing this type of work, but I want to be very that we have to be uncomfortable, and we have to continuously challenge the structures that have been set up that have marginalized people like me. Because to be honest with you, in the 20 years that I've been here in this county, as involved as I was, as many doors as I knocked, I was not called upon until this commission was formed. So I want to be very clear that we have to look for every single way to reach the communities that are not being reached, because the system hasn't worked for us.
Thank you so much, Nadia. The next item before we adjourn, and the last item, is new business. Does anyone have new business they would like to add? And if not, I'll mention one item. We have received a request from Council President Katz to look at a pending piece of legislation. This is Bill 3420, looking at officer accountability and how that process works. The bill is a lot more detailed than that. I'm not giving a proper summary at this moment. We received that request quite recently. I think it was late last week. So we didn't want to add that to the agenda for today, since we wanted to spend time hearing from each other about our priorities. But Dalvin and I would like to call a meeting for next Monday at the same time at 6:30 to discuss that bill. We recognize that with the very short notice, people might not be able to attend. Which is why we also want to take advantage of the process outlined earlier, where we'll send out a request for feedback from the commissioners. Once again, noting that any feedback you provide will be publicly available and published on the website. And then we can do that a couple of times prior to the meeting on Monday, so we can all hear from each other. Any questions about that or any other new business items? Ms. Branson?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the bill number?
3420.
And what's the topic?
It's looking at police disciplinary processes. Carlos, would you be able to give a better summary than me?
Yeah, it is about the police disciplinary procedures and collective bargaining within hearing boards that take place within the internal investigation of police officers when they.
Is this the bill introduced by Councilmember Reamer?
Yes, I've linked it in the chat box for everybody to take a look at.
Okay, and can we see the letter from Council President Katz? What exactly is he asking us to do?
So there was no letter from President Katz. We can request more clarity on what feedback he's requesting.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is because if you're not familiar with the bill, people need to go and read the bill, and people this is I would hope that in addition to the bill text, the Carlos and Susan can also provide the memo that was sent to council members. That will give us the pros and cons and the inside and out of what the bill actually says and does. It would seem to me, just as an initial thought, that this commission is not an advocacy organization. it is really good for advocacy organizations to take positions on bills. This commission is not an advocacy organization, and so us taking a position on a bill could be problematic, and could endanger the rest of our work. If I'm more than a little familiar with this bill, which is why I am suggesting caution, and that we understand the role of a commission. The role of the commission is not to be an advocate. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Branson. Delvin?
As somebody that's also pretty familiar with the bill, I understand what Ms. Branson's saying in terms of us not being an advocacy commission, but I also think that the reason we're being asked is because we're the county's appointed police advisory commission, and if we're not in favor of the bill, or if we're not in support of the bill, then it does look bad upon this bill that we're not supporting it and we're the ones that they appointed. And so I think even Shabab and I spoke about this. Councilmember Reamer reached out to folks individually as well to try to get folks, to submit testimony in support of the bill. And I think that as we go forward, this isn't going to be the last ask that is made of us to speak out in support or not to not support a bill. And even though we are not an advocacy commission, I think that we should probably come to grips with the fact that our opinion is going to be asked. And there are some bills that I know each of us personally feel are good bills, right? And that we do with that what we may, but we have to be prepared to land on one side of the fence or the other, I think.
No, I don't think we do. We are. If you look at the charge of this commission, it does not involve weighing in on individual pieces of legislation. If you can show me that in the charge of the commission, then I'll be willing to reconsider my position. But the charge of this commission is not giving voice, support, or non-support to individual pieces of legislation. That's a mistake. And it's very good for us to establish the precedent that no, we will not weigh in as a commission on individual pieces of legislation, because that undermines our long-term work. If you don't believe that, that's fine with me. But we're not an advocacy organization, and we shouldn't be in the position of giving an opinion about a bill, because then we become an advocacy organization.
So and if I may,
minds what we do.
If I may, Ms. Branson, one of the commission's duties are defined under Code Section 35.6 to advise the council on policing matters, provide information regarding best practices, recommend policies, programs, legislation, or regulations. So that's listed in our legislative authority. So that is something that we are tasked with.
That does not involve real time. That does not involve doing it in real time, which is what we're being asked to do. Look, let me, you know what? I worked in a legislative environment for 30-some years. Believe me now or believe me later, okay? But if you weigh in on this, you undermine this commission. But you do what you want. And I hope that if we decide to weigh in, whatever it is, that there's a vote. Because I assure you that I will vote against it, because it will undermine everything we do from here on in. And the integrity of this commission's ultimate recommendations and how it affects the people who really need us to speak is what's the most important to me. We don't need, as my great aunt used to say, sugar, you don't need to dance on every tune just because somebody asked you. You need to figure out who the partners are. So that is the West Virginia wisdom I'm passing on to you. We don't need to dance on every tune, sugar, just because somebody asked us. That's a really bad idea.
Madam Chair, if I could ask if we just have an opportunity, as you've suggested, to read the bill, and
certainly
also to do as Ms. Branson has suggested, to read the other documents and background that are addressed regarding that bill. And I don't think anyone is busting out of the gates, eager to do anything that's going to harm the effectiveness of this commission. I think you are an awesome chair, you and Dalvin, and I would not, I think we are all very respectful of the two of you, and you are heading this commission. So I would like to just say that we are going to read, and I don't think anybody is about action on this yet, and certainly not without acting as a unit under the direction of you and Dalvin.
Certainly, thank you, everyone. And I do think Ms. Branson makes a good point that if we are taking action on specific legislation, a vote might be a very very important way to make our decision as a body. I'll allow one more last comment from Robin, who has his hand raised, and then we can adjourn. As a reminder, we're going to take this week to look at some items, and we'll have another meeting a week from today to have a real-time discussion for those that are able to make it on such short notice. And we can discuss next steps at that time. Oh, and I see Robin.
I think I'm gonna pass. I
Okay.
think let's let this work itself out.
Perfect. Unless there are any other burning items, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Perfect.
I just want to, I'm sorry, Madam Bob. I just saw a notice. Did you see Susan Farrak's comments in the
Yes,
chat?
and
Okay, I just wanted
certainly. And Susan, I appreciate you looking into that matter for us so we can have some more clarity on the request and the timeline.
Sure.
Thank you all. And with that, let's adjourn. Have a good evening and see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.